What comes next? You've been freed. Do you know how hard it is to lead?
All right, so the Revolutionary War has ended, and patriots find themselves starting a brand new nation and asking themselves the question, okay, now what? So, a little recap for you. The Revolutionary War was fought between 1775, starting with the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and ending in 1783 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris and the official surrender. It was primarily fought because the colonists were unhappy about taxation without representation. If you remember, the French and Indian War cost Britain a lot of money. And so when they accumulated all these war debts, they needed to find a way to pay off those debts. And the easiest way they could find was to tax the colonists that were living here in the colonies. And in order to enforce those, they left behind British soldiers to collect the taxes. Now, the colonists were unhappy because many of them had left Britain wanting to find freedom, and suddenly they're surrounded by British soldiers again. Not only that, they were being taxed by a country that they didn't have a say in anything with the government. They were not allowed to be represented in Parliament. And so they felt it wasn't fair that they should be supporting this country that they didn't have any input in. So the war starts, and they sign the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. That is why we celebrate Independence Day here in this country. The war ends with the signing of the Treaty of Paris on September 3rd, 1783. So at this time, Americans realized that they needed an organized government in order to be successful. You can't just have everybody doing whatever they want, wherever they want. As much fun as that might sound, somebody has to be running things. And they really started realizing this during the war, that they weren't going to be able to organize an army and really mobilize troops unless somebody was in charge of things. And so some of the people really wanted a strong central government, like take charge, do things, get this done. And others were kind of like, no, we just left a monarchy. We don't need another king around here. Let's have like a more hands off approach. You do your thing, I'll do mine. That kind of attitude. So, Continental Congress came together to write the Articles of Confederation in 1777. Again, this was during the war, and it wasn't ratified until 1781, so near closer to the end of the war. This was basically the first constitution of the United States. Now, it had several problems. So basically, it created a national government made up of a Congress of officials, elected officials that had been voted in, but there would not be a president. They did not want one leader in charge of the whole country. They wanted 13 leaders, one from each colony. And so they decided that all states would have equal representation. Congress delegates would have a limited time. You couldn't serve indefinitely because they were afraid if one person served for a long period of time, that they would get way too much power and they would try and take over, and you'd have another monarchy on your hands. Again, many of them wanted the farthest thing from monarchy they could think of. So, the rule was you could serve a 3-year term over a period of 6 years. So, you could serve again another 3-year term, but you would have to wait at least 6 years. So, that way, no one person could be in charge or make the decision for your state for any long period of time. Again, they had equal representation, didn't matter how big or how populated your colony was. In order to pass a bill, you needed 9 out of the 13 colonies to approve it. So, a vast majority. If you wanted to make an amendment or change to the actual Constitution itself, you needed unanimous approval. All 13 representatives had to vote in favor of it, or else it wouldn't happen. And they had no national court system. It was going to be run, each colony does their own courts. In the Articles of Confederation, they gave the colonies the power to declare war, or Congress, the power to declare war, appoint military officers, sign treaties, make alliances, appoint foreign ambassadors, manage relations with Indians, and the states could tax people, not Congress. They did not want a federal tax system. They wanted the states to be able to do this. And Congress could not draft soldiers or regulate trade. There's no rule on it. It was kind of more a hands-off of a central government and more of a each state does their own thing and what works best for them. You decide what works best for your state, make it happen so that you thrive. It was a very weak central government system and it was chaos. It really just fell apart. Soldiers weren't getting paid in some states because they weren't sure where their money was coming from. There was all kinds of disputes. And so by the mid 1780s or so, Americans decided this is not going to work. We need a stronger central government. We need something else. So 39 delegates had signed the Constitution, the new U.S. Constitution, in 1787. And at this point, it now has to go to all the states for ratification. And representatives from the states have to sign off. There's several delegates for each state. And they have to sign off and say that they agree. But they were divided. You had one group called the Federalists. These are the people that loved the Constitution exactly as it was written. They really liked the strong central government that's going to take charge and really just run everything. We have one national government that takes charge of all the states. And then you had the Anti-Federalists. These are people that knew that we needed some more government, but they really didn't want to give strong powers to a national government. They were really afraid about giving excessive powers to government or excessive powers to a federal or national Congress because they had just fought for all these freedoms. And so they argued that if we have a strong central government and one big government that takes charge of everything, what did we fight for? We're losing it all. So these people said, we are not going to sign the Constitution as it is. And they started publishing articles in the papers criticizing it, telling people why the Constitution was wrong and why nobody should ratify it. But the founding fathers knew we needed a Constitution. They knew we needed a stronger government. So 3 men started writing a series of 85 essays arguing for the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. These men were Federalists, obviously, because they were in favor of the Constitution. And these papers appeared in the Independent Journal under a pseudonym, Publius, which is a Latin or Roman-based name, because they didn't want people to know who was writing it. But there were 3 primary writers. Alexander Hamilton, he wrote 51 of the 85 essays. And then James Madison wrote 29, and John Jay wrote 5. Originally, it was supposed to be just 25 essays. They sat down, they had this plan, they were going to write 25 essays and split it up. And John Jay actually got very ill in the process, and he had to stop after 5. And then James Madison and Alexander Hamilton kind of took off with it and just kept on writing. So it argued several things. The first was that we needed a central government that would be divided into 3 branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, and that each branch would have its own role within our government. They really felt that it was important that the U.S. government had the power to tax the people, not the states, but the government itself. And they felt like it was important that we had a system of checks and balances so that no one branch could become too powerful. And that was also in an effort and a compromise so that you didn't have to worry about, again, excessive power or monarchy. That each branch is going to kind of keep the other one in check and make sure you can't do this without my permission. So here are 3 men: Alexander Hamilton there on the left, James Madison in the middle, and John Jay on the far right. So in July 1788, a slim majority of the New York delegates decided to vote in favor of the Constitution, which effectively swayed the decision and helped to move towards ratification of the Constitution. But they did set down a condition and a rule that the amendments would be added, or that amendments would be added to secure certain additional rights. They basically said, fine, we will sign off on this, but you're going to have to add a few things to make sure that our rights won't be taken away and that this government can't get too powerful. So at this time, the men had to get together and start writing what we know of as the Bill of Rights.